By the late 19th century, the competition among European powers for colonies had intensified dramatically. Nowhere was this more visible than North Africa, and eventually the entire African continent. In the 1880s, Britain established a protectorate over Egypt. The official justification was that the Egyptians could not properly defend or maintain the Suez Canal, which Britain considered vital to its imperial lifeline to India. France viewed the growing influence of other European powers with increasing concern. After Britain strengthened its position by securing control over the Suez Canal and expanding its influence in Egypt, France sought to protect its own interests by extending its empire in North Africa. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, France established control over Algeria, expanded its authority into Tunisia, and eventually gained influence over Morocco. These acquisitions strengthened France's presence in the Mediterranean region and helped compensate for the growing power of rival European states. The competition for territory and influence among the great powers intensified imperial rivalries and contributed to the broader tensions that characterized European politics before World War I. Once one European power seized territory in Africa, all the others felt compelled to claim land as well. Colonial expansion became not just economic, it became a matter of national pride. By the end of the 19th century, nearly all of Africa had been divided among the European powers in what became known as the Scramble for Africa. European nations competed to claim territory, resources, and strategic advantages across the continent. Portugal controlled large areas along the western and southeastern African coasts, while Germany acquired colonies including German East Africa, present-day Tanzania, German Southwest Africa, Namibia, Togo, and Cameroon. Italy established control over Libya and Eritrea and attempted to expand into Ethiopia. Belgium gained possession of the Congo Free State, later known as the Belgian Congo. Meanwhile, Britain built the largest African empire, controlling territories such as Egypt, Sudan, South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. France also created a vast colonial empire stretching across North and West Africa. By 1900, only a few independent African states remained, demonstrating the extent to which European imperial rivalries had reshaped the continent. Wherever these borders touched, tension and skirmishes were common because boundaries were often arbitrarily drawn and poorly understood. One of the most significant colonial conflicts of the late 19th century was the Boer War in South Africa. The roots of the conflict stretched back to the early colonial period, when Dutch settlers established communities in the region. After Britain seized control of the strategically important Cape of Good Hope in 1815, many of the Dutch settlers, known as Boers, meaning farmers, migrated inland to escape British authority and establish their own independent republics. Tensions between the Boers and the British intensified in the 1870s when vast deposits of gold, copper, and diamonds were discovered in Boer-controlled territories. These valuable resources transformed the region into one of the world's most important mining centers, with South Africa quickly becoming the leading producer of diamonds. The discovery of such wealth increased British interest in the area and set the stage for a conflict that would become one of the most important imperial wars of the era. Britain was determined to gain control of South Africa's valuable mineral resources and expanded its influence into areas claimed by the Boer republics. The Boers responded with fierce resistance, leading to the outbreak of the Boer War. Unlike traditional armies, many Boer fighters relied on guerrilla tactics, using their knowledge of the local terrain to launch surprise attacks and evade British forces. The conflict involved not only Boer men, but also many women and children who supported the war effort. In response, the British adopted increasingly harsh measures, including the use of concentration camps to isolate Boer civilians and cut support for the guerrilla fighters. Conditions in these camps were extremely poor, resulting in widespread disease, suffering, and death. The war left deep bitterness among the Boer population and became one of the most controversial episodes of British imperialism. Britain ultimately defeated the Boer republics, bringing the conflict to an end. However, rather than attempting to completely suppress the Boers, British leaders pursued a policy of reconciliation. Former Boer territories were incorporated into a new political arrangement that allowed significant self-government and gave the Boers an important role in the region's future. In 1910, Britain established the Union of South Africa, a self-governing dominion within the British Empire that united the former British colonies and Boer republics under a single government. While this settlement helped reduce tensions between the British and the Boers, it came at the expense of the country's black African majority. Black South Africans were largely excluded from meaningful political participation and denied equal rights, creating a system of racial inequality that would later develop into the formal policy of apartheid in the 20th century. European expansion during the age of imperialism extended far beyond Africa and reached nearly every corner of the globe. In Southeast Asia, France established control over Indochina, which included present-day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Although Siam, Thailand, managed to remain independent, it faced intense pressure from European powers seeking influence in the region. In China, foreign nations steadily expanded their presence as Russia pushed into Manchuria, Britain secured control of Hong Kong, and several European countries carved out exclusive spheres of influence where they enjoyed special economic and political privileges. Across the Pacific Rim, Britain annexed strategic territories, including Hong Kong and numerous Pacific islands, while France expanded into Tahiti and other parts of Polynesia. At the same time, Japan emerged as an imperial power by expanding into Korea, and the United States annexed Hawaii, extending its influence across the Pacific. By the early 20th century, imperialism had become a truly global phenomenon, with powerful nations competing for territory, resources, markets, and strategic advantage on nearly every continent. Not all Europeans supported imperialism and colonial expansion. Critics argued that empire building primarily benefited wealthy investors and powerful governments rather than ordinary citizens. One of the most influential critics was the British economist J.A. Hobson, who contended that European nations should invest their wealth at home instead of overseas. He believed that resources spent on acquiring and maintaining colonies would be better used to address poverty, unemployment, and social problems within Europe. Hobson and other opponents also challenged the idea of the white man's burden, arguing that it was often a moral justification for economic exploitation and political domination, rather than a genuine effort to improve the lives of colonized peoples. Critics further pointed to the harsh realities of colonial rule. European powers frequently seized land from indigenous populations with little regard for the communities that were displaced. When local peoples resisted, colonial armies often relied on advanced military technology, including machine guns and modern artillery, to suppress uprisings and maintain control. Moreover, the wealth generated by colonial economies generally flowed back to Europe, while many colonized societies received few of the economic benefits. These criticisms highlighted the gap between imperialism's stated ideals and its actual consequences, fueling growing opposition to colonial rule both within Europe and among colonized peoples themselves. Far from reducing international tensions, imperial expansion often intensified rivalries among the European powers. As nations raced to acquire colonies, they frequently clashed over territorial claims and strategic interests, leading to border disputes and diplomatic crises across Africa and Asia. Competition for overseas possessions also encouraged military buildups, as governments expanded their armies and navies to protect their empires and deter their rivals. At the same time, the struggle for power contributed to the formation of rival alliance systems, with countries seeking partners to strengthen their positions against competing states. Imperialism also fueled nationalism, as citizens took pride in their nation's colonial achievements and increasingly viewed other powers with suspicion and hostility. By the early 20th century, these growing rivalries had created an atmosphere of mistrust and competition that helped pave the way for the outbreak of World War I. Germany was a relative latecomer to imperialism and sought to build a global empire that could rival Britain's vast overseas possessions. To support its growing ambitions, Germany began constructing a powerful navy in the 1890s under Kaiser Wilhelm II. British leaders viewed this naval expansion as a direct threat to Britain's long-standing dominance of the seas and responded by increasing the size and strength of the Royal Navy, including the construction of new battleships. Germany then expanded its fleet even further, triggering a naval arms race between the two powers. As other European nations strengthened their own militaries in response, competition among the great powers intensified. This growing militarism fostered fear, suspicion, and distrust throughout Europe, making international conflicts more likely and contributing to the tensions that eventually led to World War I. To protect their security and advance their interests, European nations increasingly formed military alliances during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy joined together in the Triple Alliance, pledging mutual support in the event of conflict. In response, Britain, France, and Russia developed closer ties that eventually became known as the Triple Entente. Although these agreements were intended to deter aggression and maintain a balance of power, they also divided Europe into two rival and increasingly hostile camps. As tensions rose, any dispute between members of the opposing alliances had the potential to draw multiple nations into a larger conflict. By 1914, Europe had become a continent of armed alliances, deep suspicions, and competing interests, making a major war far more likely. Ironically, despite the intense rivalries, arms races, and imperial competition of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Europe experienced an unusually long period of relative peace from 1871 to 1914, the longest such period since the days of the Roman Empire. This stability, however, was far more fragile than it appeared. Although the major powers avoided a continent-wide war, smaller conflicts continued to erupt, especially in the Balkans, where nationalism and imperial rivalry remained constant sources of tension. Several international crises and war scares brought Europe to the brink of conflict, but each was ultimately resolved through diplomacy, compromise, or restraint, often with Germany playing a key role in preventing escalation. The balance of power had changed dramatically after the unification of Germany in 1871. Germany quickly emerged as the largest and most powerful state in Europe outside of Russia, combining a strong industrial economy with a formidable military. Its rapid rise transformed European politics and disrupted the balance that had existed since the defeat of Napoleon. As Germany grew in strength, neighboring nations became increasingly wary, leading to military build-ups, alliance formation, and heightened suspicion among the great powers. By the early 20th century, Europe had effectively become an armed camp, with rival nations prepared for war and bound by competing alliance systems. Although peace persisted on the surface, the continent was filled with political tensions, nationalist movements, imperial rivalries, and military preparations. Under these conditions, it would take only a single spark, a seemingly minor crisis, to set off a chain reaction. That spark would come in 1914, igniting the conflict that became known as World War I.